These planes were the successors of the widely used German Ju-88 bombers. Initially, they were planned to be just an upgraded variant of that type, but they were found to be too radical at first. But after the failure of the German WWII program, which was meant to produce a second generation of state-of-the-art German bombers, the plans for an upgraded Ju-88 were dusted off again. These were the Junkers Ju-188 bombers. So let's see the history of these aircraft today. The history of the Junkers bomber family started in 1935, when Germany was in the middle of modernizing its military forces. The RLM issued new specifications this year for a new Schnellbomber, or fast bomber. The requirements were demanding for the time: a maximum speed of 500 km an hour, a bomb load of 5 to 800 kilograms, and at least one machine gun for defense. The proposals entered for the new specifications were the Henschel HS-127, the Messerschmitt Bf-162 design, which was a modification of the later Bf-110, and finally, Junkers entered two of their designs: the Ju-85, which was a twin-tail bomber, and the Ju-88, which was a simpler design. Eventually, after testing, the Ju-88 model was declared a winner, thanks to its bigger bomb load and overall better design than its competitors. The prototype of the new bomber made its maiden flight in December 1936, and after numerous modified variants and years of test flights, the production of the Ju-88A series began in 1939. The production was slow at the beginning, but later it picked up, and from 1942, around 3,000 of these planes were built every year until 1945, with many different variants and specialized models. The B version of the Ju-88 was a prototype to test a streamlined stepless cockpit design, similar to the Heinkel HG-111 models. But only 10 units were built, as at that time the new cockpit design was deemed too radical. But luckily, Junkers did not stop working on these models. We will get back to them shortly. If you're interested in the detailed history and variants of the Junkers Ju-88, I have already made a full separate video about that aircraft. Go check it out. By the time the Ju-88 production started, the RLM already initiated the so-called Bomber B program, to replace the current bombers with a second generation using new stronger engines and featuring larger bomb load and higher speed and range. This program was actually started when Junkers submitted their EF-74 design to the ministry, which later became the Ju-288 model. Several designs were entered to the new program, like the Arado AR-340, the Dornier DO-317, the Focke-Wulf FW-191, the Henschel HS-130C, and of course the Junkers 288. These large bombers were planned to use the newly developed 2,500 horsepower engines and would have possessed similar payload and range to the Heinkel HG-177 design, but without the problems of the Heinkel bombers coupled DB606 engines, which use two engines in one engine nacelle to deliver more power in a smaller package. But the decision to base the whole program on the proposed new engine designs turned out to be a big mistake, as the constant delays in the development of these engines held back this program, even though the prototype airframes were ready by mid-1940, while the proposed engines all turned out to be costly failures. The Daimler DB604 performed under the requirements and was cancelled in 1942. The BMW 802 and 803 radial engines turned out to be similar failures, and the Junkers 222 engines were also still far from getting into production by 1942. The RLM had no backup plans in case the Bomber B program fails, so when it actually did, they decided to revisit the Ju-88B model again, as now they wasted several years and the current bombers in service started to become seriously outdated. Some of the Ju-88E models were modified to test new features, such as a new dorsal turret, new wings and tail design, and after several variations, the V-44 model received the new designation, Ju-188V1, and became the base of the new series. We can compare the shape of the new aircraft to the Ju-88 to see the design changes. The new model was about half a meter longer, had 2 meters larger wingspan, and of course the most prominent change is the new nose design. But it also received a new tail, different defensive armament, and during testing, the RLM asked the manufacturer to modify the engine nacelles to be able to accommodate either the BMW 801 engines or the Jumo 213A models. The modification of the existing Ju-88 model advanced in a good pace, and in October 1942 the new Ju-188 was ordered into production. Though the prototypes only started their trials early 1943, but ordering the type was not a great risk, as most of the modifications were already tested on the Ju-88E models. But as it turned out, the ministry's caution with the power plants, which was probably based on their failure with the Bomber B program, was justified in the end, as the UMO engines were delayed again, so the Ju-188E models using the BMW engines were the first ones to leave the factory in February 1943, followed soon by the A models using the UMO engines. By the end of the year, 283 Ju-188 bombers were delivered, but most of them the BMW-powered variants, as the UMO engine's production stayed very slow. On the production models, the armament was changed compared to the prototypes, and the most prominent change was the 20mm cannons installed in the nose and in the turret. And that brings us to the variants of this plane. The Ju-188A1 featured no dive brakes and used the 1750 horsepower UMO 213 engines. These models featured a 20mm cannon in the nose, another 20mm cannon in the dorsal turret, a 13mm gun in the rear of the cockpit, and a twin machine gun in the gondola under the fuselage. The E1 variants were similar to the A models, but used the 1700 horsepower BMW 801 engines, and the 20mm cannon in the dorsal turret was replaced with a 13mm machine gun. The A2 variant was upgraded with newer UMO engines featuring methanol and water injection, which boosted their power to 2240 horsepower at takeoff. The A3 and E2 models were built as torpedo bombers, with the UMO and BMW engines respectively. They did not have the external bomb racks, but they could carry two 800 kg torpedoes under the fuselage, and they featured a search radar in the nose. The planned C model would have featured a remote-controlled FA-15 turret in the tail with a pair of 13mm machine guns, but the system was so unreliable these plans were abandoned. The D and F variants were reconnaissance models. They only had a three-man crew, the bombardier and the front cannon was removed, and photo equipment and extra fuel tanks were installed. The following G models featured a modified fuselage, which was extended with a wooden fairing to be able to carry their bomb load internally, and the manual turret in the tail was tested on these variants, but the space in the tail was so small that only very short men could get into this position, and the firing angle of the guns was very limited. As this turret failed the expectations, it was decided to use the FA-15 remote turret instead. Before these modified models could enter production, the war ended. The Ju-188H was similar to the G model, but it was a reconnaissance variant, not a bomber. The following J, K, and L models were all planned as high-altitude variants, with pressurized cockpit, more wing area, and instead of the original gondola, just having the more streamlined wooden fairing under the fuselage. The J model was designed as a heavy fighter, carrying two 30mm and two 20mm cannons in the nose. The K model would have been the bomber variant, while the L model a reconnaissance version. Before they entered service, this lineup received a new designation as Ju-388, but they retained the J, K, and L markings for the different variants. The Ju-188 was 14.95 meters long with a wingspan of 22 meters. It had an empty weight of 9,990 kilograms and a maximum takeoff weight of 15,195 kilograms. This variant was powered by two BMW 801D engines, each of them delivering 1,700 horsepower. With these engines, the bomber could reach a top speed of 500 km an hour and a cruise speed of 375 km an hour. It had a service ceiling of 9,350 meters and a range of 1,950 kilometers. The bomber's defensive armament consisted of one 20mm cannon in the nose, two 13mm machine guns in the dorsal turret and the back of the cockpit, and either a dual 7.92mm or a single 13mm machine gun at the rear of the ventral gondola. It could carry 3,000 kg maximum bomb load, including the internal bomb bay and the external racks. The Ju-188 entered service in May 1943 with Erprobungskommando Commando 188 and KG-6, and they flew their first mission in August, attacking a factory in England. But the type entered service late in the war, and the slow production meant only 283 units were delivered in 1943 and 793 in 1944. Almost half of the models delivered were built as reconnaissance variants, and the Ju-188 served mostly on the Eastern Front and over the Mediterranean. They did not replace the Ju-88 bombers, but were directed to the same groups, and the Ju-188 models were used for missions where their increased power and range could be the most useful. But as the Allied fighter presence over Europe grew stronger, the usefulness of these planes diminished quickly. By summer 1944, the building of the Ju-188 model stopped, as by that time the Germans were desperately trying to counter the Allied bombing raids and their superiority, so most of their resources were directed to fighter production. The Junkers Ju-188, as interesting as it looks, was just an afterthought for the Luftwaffe after their Bomber B program failed. They entered service late in the war and were only produced in relatively small numbers, so they had no real impact on the events. But interestingly, after the war, the French naval aviation used them until 1951. Sadly, there are no surviving intact planes from this model today. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a like, subscribe to my channel, and in the comments let me know if there's any interesting events or vehicles you'd like to see.